This conference underway. Former President Kgalema Motlanthe is addressing members there. Let's listen in.
In this august gathering of MK combatants, in my previous life, I spent time with the first generation MK members in our second country. You know, we those of us who swear by God and our two countries. There was a little country we owned called Robben Island. And so these comrades who constituted the first generation of MK operatives and recruits had never had the honor of taking an oath, the oath of MK. But they were involved in organizing the first recruits and providing them with training. Here in Soweto, in a place called uMkhonto, just across from Orlando Stadium, there's a double-storied house there, structure, which was a unique structure in the olden days because it had two surgeries. One was a surgery of a medical practitioner, and on the upper level was a surgery of Radishubane. Radishubane was a trained herbalist. And so when they greet you, they say, Atlamare Obon. And I'm referring to this place because this is a place where Jack Hodgson gave the initial training in how to handle explosives. And the people who were there for such training would sit together with patients who were coming for consultation with the medical practitioner. And at the right moment, they just slip up to the higher level where they would receive training in how to handle explosives. And so the explosives, gunpowder and everything were contained in greasy bottles and stuff like that there, so that they were not easily identifiable by, you know, the security police. I'm sharing this with you because the roots of MK explained to us that MK was, in fact, an army of the people. Ordinary South Africans who felt that it was time to answer the call came forward and volunteered. And it was only once the conditions became almost impossible that the majority of them then went abroad. But as you know, the first recruit of MK was Ntate Rumlange, unfortunately still alive, and he should have been here. He was the very first person to be recruited into MK and was part of the first 6 MK recruits to be sent for military training in China, together with Comrade Wilton Mkwai, Raymond Mhlaba, Stephen Naidu, as well as Joe Gabi and Patrick Giraffe Mtembu. Now, this first generation, when we were spending time with them in prison, key among them was Comrade Edgar Ngoyi. Edgar Ngoyi, well, in prison, we spend lots of time having to debate and discuss, political theory and so on. So Edgar Ngoyi, as an old MK recruit, would always ask one question. He would be the first one to raise his hand and ask a question. And his question consistently would be, what relationship does what we are discussing have with the struggle of working people? So in any session, before you could proceed, he wants to know, lo mcimbi esingawo apha udibana njani nedabi labasebenzi? And if you can't explain the connection between what you are about to discuss or study and the struggle of the working people, it doesn't make sense to him. So you would not be able to proceed with that. He gives his blessings only once it is clear that there's a link between the subject of study and the struggle of working people. Now, Edgar Ngoyi was a very powerful character. He had unsagging morale in the most difficult of circumstances. You would think that, he's at a picnic. Nothing ever put him down. The first time he was sentenced to 2 years, and his co-accused were sentenced to 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, 8 years. And in the first trip on their way to Robben Island, when, because prisoners were put right at the bottom of the boat, and somewhere between Cape Town and Robben Island, there's a confluence of two oceans. And in that spot, the boat in the rainy season cannot go through. And so if you are traveling for the first time, it makes people, to throw up and so on. And so the comrades who were with Comrade Graf in that boat say when they were nauseated and throwing up, Comrade Graf, instead of sympathizing with them, he was sentenced to 2 years. He says to them, no, this place called Robben Island Prison does not exist actually. These people are going to throw us into the ocean, not far from where we are now. So please be patient. And so by the time they reached Robben Island, these comrades thought he was a very cruel comrade and that they would not ever talk to him for the duration of their sentences. But typical of Edgar Ngoyi, he would not leave them alone. Instead, he would from time to time go to them and say to a comrade who was sentenced to 8 years and says to him, Mfondini, Masibale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Ucinga uba uzawuphuma apho uphila? But you know, his other comrades who were continued, you know, with the sabotage acts were arrested. And then, of course, they fetch him from Robben Island because he's implicated. And so his sentence of 2 years gets increased. And then again, other comrades get arrested, so they fetch him from the island. And then, so eventually, cumulatively, he ended up serving 17 years. 17 years. But he was like that. Comrade Graf was a very powerful comrade. One time we had a young colored comrade who, upon being sentenced, converted to the Islamic faith and you know, was a very prayerful person, but also characterized by laziness that you cannot imagine. Anyway, so it was always the responsibility of the organization to mobilize such people. And so eventually he aligned himself with the organization. And one day, because he was so deeply religious, it was agreed that instead of having the normal political education session, he must be given the platform for that day and asked, you know, to share with the comrades his own perspectives from a religious point of view. And so Mahomet was to deliver this talk. And the senior comrades decided that, well, you know, discipline must be maintained for that session. So Comrade Graf was tasked that, Comrade Graf, please, you must chair this session and maintain discipline. Don't allow these young comrades to ask awkward questions and so on. And then he agrees and he accepts the responsibility. So Mahomet gives his input and he describes heaven. He starts off by stating that, you know, in heaven, the streets are paved in gold, and there are canals of wine flowing, and so on. And so, Comrade Graf's response to this input, first thing he says is that, Jim, come, you know what you are describing. If that place existed like you are describing it, the colonialists would have long colonized it. And so that was the end of the session. But I'm telling you this story of Comrade Graf because he remained in harness of the struggle right up to his last day. At one point, as the January 8th statement was being drafted and the names of comrades who had departed were being listed, word reached head office that Comrade Graf had passed away, and his name was included. And so the statement is then sent to the printers, only for Comrade Charles Ngakula to phone with a correction. So Comrade Ngakula explains that no, it's not Graf who has passed away. It is his brother who's passed away. And so the printers were then duly informed, but all they could do was to stick, a tape on top of Comrade Graf's name. So in that January 8th statement, there was a blank space, which is, erasure of the name of Edgar Ngoyi. And so afterwards, you see, of course, he had been in hospital, but was discharged and his brother passed on. So when comrades go to see him afterwards and share this, miscommunication with him, typical of Edgar Ngoyi, he says to the comrades, "Mfondini benipha isibhedlela ngathi ndilele ndeva ingilosi eluGabriel endibamba." Of remaining in harness of the struggle to the last day of their lives. And so your presence here in this gathering today is testimony to the fact that you remain in harness to ensure that the struggle of our people, the struggle that you waged in the name of the people, will continue under these new circumstances, under these new conditions, and therefore we must ensure that this contingent connects with the younger people, because continuity will be assured by how far we succeed to define our goals in a manner which resonates with the feelings of the younger people. Because the older you become, the more you adapt to circumstances. Even when your shoe pinches, it feels comfortable. And you lose the will to continue struggling to change conditions for the better. And that's why we need the oomph of youth. We need the energies of young people who will push boundaries, of course. And that's how we will be able to ensure that this revolution does not peter out. With these words, comrades, I'm really standing here to say only one word, Amandla.
Former President